How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with inner and outer Moka? Part 4. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. So, what did you want to talk about? Naruto didn't reply straight away and instead leaned against the railing that stopped him from falling down to the city below. He was on top of the Monte Carlo, it was almost midnight and Sukun was standing in front of him with an inquisitive look. Well, on the plane, you asked me why I killed that yokai, right? Sukun frowned at the apparent subject but nodded his head anyway. Yeah, I did. Then here's your answer, because he was trying to kill me. Naruto frowned as soon as the words left his mouth before he scratched the back of his head. Ah, man, I had planned to bring you up here and give you some really awesome speech about why I killed him, but the words just aren't coming to me. Sukun sighed and leaned against the railing next to him. It's fine, I think I'm over it. He scratched his cheek with his index finger. Just tell me one thing. What is it? You didn't enjoy it, did you? No. He answered immediately before arching an eyebrow at him. What's up with you? What do you mean? I mean you seem a bit different. Maybe I am. And why would you be a bit different? Sukun shrugged. Maybe it had something to do with seeing a mother trying to kill her own daughter, who knows? Ah, right, Naruto remembered that girl. Right after her father had been shot by her insane parent, they'd both been taken to the hospital the day before. That was the last he'd seen of her, but he hoped she wasn't scarred by seeing her mother even if she didn't know who she was at the time be murdered right in front of her. That wouldn't do well for his conscience. It was silent for a few moments before Naruto spoke up again. Sukun, you're not completely over the fact that people have died recently because of me, are you? Sukun shifted uncomfortably before turning around and leaning against the railing to look out into the city. Not entirely, no. I'm still a bit angry and confused, but like I said, I think I'll be able to get over it with time. Maybe. Naruto agreed, shifting around so that he was in the same position as he found it awkward to talk in the way they had been. Or you could get even more angry and confused and end up snapping at people at times, me especially. When Sukun didn't say anything, Naruto sighed. Sukun, I think the words might be coming to me now. Oh, really? Yeah. His expression didn't change. At one point in time there was 5 villages, well actually there was more, but they're not important, the 5 villages are. Even though the other human wasn't looking in his direction, Naruto could tell he was listening. These 5 villages were more than a little resentful towards each other, and because of this the people who were the village's soldiers fought each other relentlessly. Do you really want to speak about it, Naruto? I have to at some point, might as well be now. He replied. For years and years the soldiers of these 5 villages hated each other, sure, they made alliances with each other sometimes, but it never lasted and they just went back to fighting again. Anyway damn it. I've lost the words again. Sukun smiled in slight amusement. You can't lose words, Naruto-san. It's a phrase. He huffed back. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that because fighting was a constant between the 5 villages, so was hate. And I'm not speaking about simple hate between 2 people, oh no. This was hate between over 100,000 people. That's quite a number of people to hate each other. Tell me about it. Naruto smiled slightly. Where are you going with this, Naruto-san? I'm not going anywhere, not yet anyway. That was a terrible pun. No way, it was awesome, you just can't see why yet. He retorted and Sukun shook his head. To answer your question though, I guess I'm going in the direction towards the fact that so long as hate and pain exist, people will continue to kill and fight each other. But you didn't hate that yokai. How would you know that? You only met him on the plane. And how do you know that? I guess I don't. He gestured with his hand for the blonde to continue. Go on. Sukun, well I admit I didn't hate that yokai and he probably didn't hate me, the hate was somewhere. You do know that he was sent to assassinate me, right? I do now. Then someone in the organization has some sort of hate towards me for whatever reason. Sukun's grip on the railing tightened somewhat. And because of that someone in this organization, that yokai was killed. Yes. He admitted. It's the way things work, Sukun. The blonde frowned. Imagine a country, let's use America in this instance. If, at some point, probably. Then who suffers because of that war? The country itself doesn't, the soldiers and people in the war do. In this instance, American and Japanese soldiers would kill each other. What are you trying to say this time? I'm trying to say that while the countries will hate each other, it's the ones fighting for the country that die, the ones that suffer pain. He sighed. You can see the similarities, right? Even though this organization isn't a country, they work the same way. The organization as a whole doesn't die, the ones that work for it do. Sukun stayed silent for a few moments, just staring out at the city. I think I can see where you're coming from. Good. He got off the railing and stretched. Well, I think we best be going. Moka-chan and Kurumu-chan are probably waiting and we wouldn't want to miss our flight back. Yeah, let's get going, Naruto. Well, at least the Las Vegas casinos didn't have to suffer a certain blonde with the ability to change his physical appearance to that of an older person. Naruto frowned, staring at the board in front of him. Other students were crowded around him or the board, whatever one. Midterm test results. When did I even do a test? He mused, ignoring the wails of students that had failed and the cheers of the ones that had passed. His eyes went from one and down, trying to find where his own name was located. You can't even remember doing a test. Kurama rolled his eyes. That'll never change about you, always forgetful. Naruto huffed indignantly, getting a strange look from the student beside him that had been in mid-wail. It just wasn't on the top of my head, but I do remember studying for it. You didn't study. Or, not the main you, anyway. Loans are useful for all sorts of things: washing, cleaning, homework, and most importantly, studying. Naruto retorted before his eyes landed on his name right where the number 131 was. Well, I passed at least. The wails of the failures and cheers of the ones who had passed changed and transformed into something ugly. The cries of multiple male students and some women with hearts in their eyes. Awesome. It says Moka-san is 13th. Not only is she the most Bodhi. Naruto blocked out the rest of whatever he was going to say along with the others and glanced behind him to see the vampire, the one he'd apologized and given a lot of his own blood to while they were still in Vegaso, much so that he was surprised she didn't end up getting bloated. Don't get him wrong though, sure he apologized, but he didn't take his words back and made sure that she understood that he wouldn't be letting her get involved in anything concerning Fairy Tail. She'd accepted it reluctantly, but he still had a feeling that she was going to try and keep getting involved. He pushed past the students and made his way over to her, an easy smile on his face. Hey, Moka-chan, congratulations on getting 13th. Her expression brightened at the compliment. Thanks, Naruto-kun, but it's nothing, really. He repressed the urge to twitch. If what she did was nothing, then his was worse than nothing. Not exactly a confidence booster. Before the blonde could even hope to push his thoughts out of the way to continue the conversation, a new yet familiar voice injected itself in. Moka-san, Naruto. Sukun. Naruto greeted as his fellow humans stepped beside them, forming a circle. No, three people can't make a circle, so they made a triangle. An off-center triangle from a bird's eye view, but a triangle nonetheless. The three of them were blissfully unaware of an 11-year-old child genius staring at them, or more specifically Moka. So, what did you place, Naruto? Sukun asked, having already seen Moka's name on the board when he'd looked. 131st. 3 behind me then. Yeah. He admitted, not liking the way the corner of Tsukun's lips twitched upward slightly. But you know what they say, 3 is the magic number. Who says that? I just said it then. That wasn't my question. I know, I deliberately gave you that answer anyway. Sukun rolled his eyes while Moka smiled at the interactions. The three continued to talk amongst themselves until their attention was dragged away and towards the sound of childish laughter. Ha! You deserved that. Wearing a cheeky grin was a young girl with a black pointed hat atop her brownish black hair that was cut short. From the angle he was at, they were the only things Naruto could make out, along with a black cloak and the thing held in her hands, which was what was that? A stick with a heart on the end of it. He shook it off and arched an eyebrow when the young girl, while still giggling to herself, pointed at a sleazy-looking guy with light-colored hair that was rubbing the back of his head while a scowl was firmly planted on his face. Hey, what the hell did you do to me? When it looked like he was going to take a strike at the girl, Moka intervened by jumping in the way, her arms spread out wide, using her own body as some sort of meat shield. I'm sorry, I don't have anything to do with this, but I can't let this go. Please don't use violence against this girl. Naruto heard the girl Moka was protecting gasp as he made his way over, followed by Tsukun. The students around them seemed to have taken notice of what was going on and decided it was in their best interests to crowd around and watch. Disbelieving murmurs that Moka had intervened traveled through them, but they were promptly ignored by everyone involved. The girl's would-be attacker let out a HMPH and put his hands in his pockets, glancing around at the crowd with annoyance. You had better remember this, Yukari. He sneered threateningly as he turned away and began walking away with the 2 other students that had been next to him. Let's go, guys. Seeing that there wasn't going to be a fight, some of the students in the crowd began to shuffle away while others stayed, not really having anything better to do. Well, it was either that or they were staring at Moka as she had bent over to get to Yukari's eye level. Naruto gave them an annoyed look and gestured with his hand for them to leave. Shoo already, geez. Thank you so much, you really saved me. My name is Sendo Yukari, by the way. Naruto arched an eyebrow when he noticed the girl trying not to stare at Moka with a slight flush on her face as she exclaimed those words. The 4 of them were seated at one of the tables just outside the cafeteria. Uzumaki Naruto. he supplied. "Oh, I know who you are," she said and Naruto blinked. "Really?" he asked and he could have sworn there was some annoyance in her eyes every time she looked at him. "Yeah, I mean most people in this school do, especially after you basically played baseball with just a bunch of mermaids." Sukun shook his head in exasperation at the reminder. "Anyway, Yukari-chan, I heard that even though you're in the same year as us, you're only 11. You're even ranked first, too." Moka said smiling at the girl who started to blush slightly. "You're really smart, Yukari-chan. That outfit is pretty cool as well." Her face warmed up at the praise and compliments before waving her hands around bashfully. "No, well cool is such I'm just." She seemed to regain her composure before adding. "Actually, you're the one who's cool and pretty and sweet, Moka-san. You know, I. What?" Naruto asked as it seemed she'd stopped her sentence completely. He was surprised, though, when she flung herself over the table at Moka and glomped the equally surprised vampire who had jumped out of her chair, shouting out for the entire world to hear. "IWUVVU, Moka-san." Sukun choked on his spit as he heard Yukari's words and chose to ignore the smirk that Naruto briefly sent him for it. "Did I just hear correctly? If you just heard Yukari-chan shout that she loved Moka-chan, then yeah," Naruto murmured, biting back a small, amused grin at Moka's awkward expression. "Every time I saw you in that classroom across the hall, I fell in love with you a bit more." Yukari was apparently explaining as she clung onto the vampire. "But after you saved me, my heart made itself up. So please, Moka-san, go out with me. It's not such a bad thing to go out with someone like me, is it? As a friend." It seemed to satisfy the girl hanging off the vampire as her expression brightened and she cheered. "Yay. I'm so happy." It had been a day since they'd met Yukari and the three of them were making their way towards their homeroom as they usually did. Kurumu had left them not too long ago as she was in a separate class. Naruto was in the middle of saying something when he stopped in the middle of his sentence, getting looks from both Moka and Sukun. He ignored them and instead glanced behind him. "Yukari-chan, what are you doing?" Instead of freezing up like the blonde had expected, she continued to reach around Moka's body, only to find both her wrists firmly restrained by Naruto's hand. "What do you think you're doing? Let me go." "No." He deadpanned. "Look, I honestly don't care what you do, but if you're going to grope someone like that, then you should do it in private and with the other person's permission." By this time, Sukun and Moka had both had enough time to turn around to face the two. "Yukari-chan, what are you doing here?" Moka asked. "Hi, Moka-san." She greeted before turning back to face the blonde with an annoyed look. "Please don't get in our way. I know all about you." "Really? Because all I know that you know about me is that I fought a bunch of mermaids, and even that is apparently public knowledge." She seemed to ignore his remark and furthered her struggles to get him to release her wrists, but he didn't budge. Uzumaki Naruto, below average academic scores, great athletic ability according to Kitsubo-sensei, but like you just said, you defeated a bunch of mermaids in their natural habitat, which means that you're someone too dangerous for Moka-san to be around. And that's all about me? That's not much information, and certainly not enough for you to claim to know all about me," he retorted and she glared. "It's enough for me to know that Moka-san being around you will only bring bad circumstances." The blonde briefly pictured Fairy Tail and Yukari used it to her advantage by yanking herself free of his loosened grip. "I love Moka-san," she continued, unknowingly snapping his attention back to her as she rubbed her wrist before reaching into her cloak. "And I can't have her be around someone like you, so that's why I'm declaring war on you." She wrenched her hand from her cloak and produced a stick with a heart on the end of it. "It's a magical wand." Yukari snapped before angrily waving it at a nearby locker, causing it to open with several brooms as well as a bucket flying out of it and heading towards the shinobi. Naruto pursed his lips, beginning to get rather annoyed with the 11-year-old as he batted the projectiles away and they skidded along the floor away from him. "And that was magic." She scowled at how easily he'd swatted the items away but continued on anyway. "I'm a witch, and with the magic I can use thanks to this wand, I'll fend off any boys wanting to get close to Moka-san." He rolled his eyes and turned around before he began walking towards his homeroom with Sukun and Moka falling in step beside him. "You have fun with that, Yukari-chan." As they walked in the direction of their class, Naruto sensed anger coming off of the three students who were leaning around the corner and glaring at Yukari and idly noted that they were the three from the other day, but otherwise chose to pay no attention to it. "I thought that it was against the school rules to reveal your true form," Sukun commented. "It is," Moka confirmed. "But it doesn't look like it bothers Yukari-chan all that much." "No, she probably doesn't care," Naruto agreed. He sighed, closing the sliding door of the newspaper club's room closed as he entered the room. "Hey." He greeted the human and succubus who were already in the room with two desks facing each other for more room while they were seated at opposite ends. I didn't ask you earlier, Kurumu-chan, but do you know anything about Sendo Yukari? The light blue-haired girl glanced away from the newspaper drafts that were on the desks and towards him. Sure I do, but why do you want to know? He grabbed a chair and sat down on it in a reverse fashion at the side of the two, his arms resting on the back of it. Call it curiosity, I guess. She shrugged at his answer. Well, she's a child genius, she plays pranks on her classmates and is hated by them. To be honest, she sounds like a selfish little kid. And that's all you know? He asked, his eyes briefly flickering over to the unopened window at the side of the room before they rested back on Kurumu's purple ones. What did you expect? It's not like I know her personally or anything. You know, Tsukun began, tapping the pencil he'd been holding on his chin. That could be why that class representative was acting aggressive towards her yesterday. Naruto blinked at him. That sleazy-looking idiot is a representative. Tsukun rolled his eyes. Of a class, yeah. And you don't know whether he's an idiot or not. You didn't argue about me saying he's sleazy. That's because I agree with you. Naruto hummed. Anyway, you were saying the reason as to why the class representative was aggressive towards Yukari-chan yesterday. I thought it would be obvious, can't you put two and two together? Of course I can, I just didn't want to steal your thunder. Yuhe. Before Tsukun could continue, Naruto's hand took itself off of the back of the chair he was seated on, made a fist and rocketed itself straight into the blonde's face, sending him sprawling back onto the floor, knocking a desk over in the process. Kurumu snickered at the blonde while he blinked. Why did you do that, and are you alright down there? Yeah, fine. Absolutely perfect. Naruto grumbled as he picked himself back up off the floor, sending an annoyed look towards the open window he'd briefly looked at before. As for why I did that, I have no clue, but I've got a feeling that I'm about to find out. Sorry for being late to the club. A familiar vampire announced as she opened the door to the club room. It just so happened that at that moment Naruto's body decided to be defiant and it surged forwards, straight for Kurumu who didn't have enough time to get out of the way. The two were sent straight onto the floor, Naruto atop the succubus with his hands grasping two things that actually felt surprisingly soft. Curious, he gave them both an equal squeeze, resulting in a moan to reach his ears. He lifted his head up and came face to face with a succubus half scowling at him, one of her eyes was closed, a deep flush was on her face, which was quite a contrast to her hair, and her mouth was open slightly with soft but deep breaths coming out of it. He made a move to get up and the girl under him groaned as he inadvertently squeezed in his efforts. Okay, let me get one thing straight first, that was not me. When she put more effort into her scowl, he purposefully squeezed once more which resulted in the expression disappearing, her mouth opening with another moan, while the flush on her face deepened. Using her momentary daze, he quickly got back to his feet and shuffled towards the window. Tsukun's mouth was open in shock as he gaped at the blonde. Naruto, did you really just? No, like I said, that was not me. It just happened to be done with my body, if that makes any sense. Going by the way Tsukun's expression didn't change, and coupled with the fact that Moka's mouth kept opening and closing, as if she was trying to form words, they either didn't understand what he was going on about, or just didn't believe him at all. Naruto his attention quickly went from the gaping human and vampire over to a seething succubus who had picked herself up. Now, Kurumu-chan. He began, using his hands in a gesture in an attempt to placate the succubus. He never was good with angry women, maybe it had something to do with bad experiences. You heard what I said before about me not doing that, right? He kept shuffling towards the window where he could now hear small giggles coming from. If it helps at all, then I just want to say that they were both very soft, firm and overall great to hold. Unluckily, his comment didn't seem to calm her down in the least, but luckily he found himself right next to the window. Before the succubus could hope to make a move, Naruto leaned out the window and grabbed a familiar black pointy hat before bringing it up and off of the witch's head. Yukari stopped giggling to herself as she felt the light weight of her hat disappear and she looked up to see a mildly annoyed Naruto looking at her. Hi. He replied flatly. If this is what you meant by war, then count me in. His straight face gained a small beepy smirk. Just don't be too upset when you lose, Yukari-chan. She smirked back at him, but instead of holding beepiness to it like his, it had certainty to it, as if she already felt like she'd won. How about we make a bet? She offered. Sure, but what's the wager? If I win, then you stay away from Moka-san. His expression didn't change as he'd already somewhat expected her to say something similar, and it annoyed the young witch slightly. Fine, but when I win, you have to obey any and all orders I give you without question for the rest of the school year. Deal? To make the bet concreted, the blonde stuck his hand out and Yukari put the straw doll that had what looked like a blonde thread in it down before shaking his hand. Naruto let go of her hand and made a gesture with his hands for her to get going. Alright, well shoo already. She huffed but complied, seeing no reason to stay there any longer, as her plan had already gone off without a hitch. When he turned back around, he found that Kurumu still looked ready to murder the next person to come within a couple of feet of her person. Moka seemed stunned and a bit annoyed, while Tsukun's expression was something between annoyed and exasperated. "See, I didn't do it. Yukari-chan did it." "Really? Because I didn't hear a confession." Kurumu snapped, scowling. The only thing that was holding her back from outright attacking him was that he seemed certain he didn't willingly grope her. The thought of the feeling it gave her brought back a small flush to her face, but she forcefully pushed it back. Naruto mistook it for anger, and he scratched the back of his head. "You can always ask her yourself, I guess." The past few days had been entertaining for Yukari, to say the least. The mini-war she had declared with Naruto had been mostly minor stuff at this point time, such as hanging a bucket of water above his door at his room, putting hot sauce in his food when he wasn't looking, and of course, how could she forget when she had put quick-drying cement at the bottom of his door to seal it shut. She still snickered at the memory of him kicking the door off of its hinges and almost hitting Tsukun in the process. Naruto hadn't been idle either though, as he had been doing things like getting pieces of paper with messages on them that said "Dunce or Airhead," which was actually a blow to her pride, seeing as she rightfully considered herself a genius, and sticking them to her chairs so that when she sat down, they'd be stuck to her without her taking any notice. Or even when he had put itching powder in her clothes. She smiled slightly to herself while walking towards the bathroom. He was an alright person in her opinion, but she still believed him to be far too dangerous to be around Moka, not to mention the fact that she wanted the vampire to herself, so she was determined to win the war. Once she reached the bathroom, she grabbed the hairdryer, pointed it at her mostly wet hair from her having had a shower not long ago, and clicked it on. Instead of warm air that always came with turning the device on, a white powder-like substance sprayed out. It went all over her hair, and when she jerked away in surprise, it ended up hitting her straight in the face as well, giving her a nice mask of white powder. "That bastard," she fumed, placing the hairdryer back down next to the sink. "Time to take it up a notch then." Paint was the main thought running through the blonde's head when he'd entered his room after school had finished for the day. Glancing to all parts of his dorm room, he found his belongings were still in their usual place, but the walls and ceiling had been painted a baby blue color that made him grimace. Kurama grinned at the change. "Sheesh, brat, I didn't know that you were trying to protect your virginity. I didn't paint this. Would you like a chastity belt then?" "I'm not protecting it." "So you do want to lose it? You're insufferable," he retorted while his eyes kept going over his room until a mental image of a giggling Yukari entered his mind. This calls for more drastic measures. He swiftly made his way over to where his backpack rested and opened it before plunging his arm into it. "What do you plan to do now?" The sound of metal clanging against metal resounded through the room. "Oh, you'll see more clanging. You're as much of a tricky bastard as I am, after all." When Naruto finally wrenched his arm free, the Biju was able to finally see what the blonde had pulled out of his seemingly bottomless backpack, and it made him smirk. "Public humiliation. Public humiliation," he confirmed. Moka glanced to her side at the blonde, who had an eerie expression as she made her way to the school with him, Tsukun and Kurumu. What was he up to? The last time she'd seen him look like that was when he'd put that paper with "Dunce" written on it on Yukari's chair. Speaking of the young witch, Moka had noticed that she actually seemed happy, and it wasn't because of her and Naruto's war. Well, it kind of was. The 11-year-old just seemed happier with the attention she was getting, even if said attention was based off humiliating another person or getting humiliated. The students who were walking towards the school along the same path were standing in small groups, pointing to something and laughing amongst themselves. Before she could dwell on it any longer, she noticed Kurumu stop in her tracks while she was looking just above the school's building. "Kurumu-chan. Is something wrong?" The succubus blinked a few times and rubbed her eyes before pointing at where she was looking without even glancing towards her. Moka, along with Tsukun and Naruto, let their eyes travel to where she was pointing and promptly felt her eyebrows disappear into her hairline. In the distance, a thin metal pole could be seen rising well above the school building. A rope was tied around the top of it, but neither of those things drastically caught her attention, even if they hadn't been there before. Oh no. What did grab her attention though was what was connected to the end of the rope, slowly spinning and circling the metal pole. From the far distance they were at, she couldn't make out any specifics, just that it was roughly human-like in shape and was painted a bright orange. "What is that?" Tsukun asked as he stared at the orange thing. Moka took her eyes off the sight and glanced at the other three people around her, taking note of the fact that Naruto had an almost undetectable victorious smirk on his face. "I don't know, maybe we should get a better look." "Yeah, let's go." Kurumu agreed as they once again began walking, only changing their direction from the class they were in to the metal pole. As they walked, every now and then Moka, Kuruma or Tsukun would steal glances at the orange thing in order to see if they could see it any better, but it didn't do much as the buildings they wove through blocked their vision. Instead of being curious like the others, Naruto seemed more content and satisfied. When they reached their destination, which wasn't that far from where they'd first seen Yukari the other day, they found around 20 other students staring up at whatever had been attached to the pole with amused expressions, while some even openly laughed. When the four in the newspaper club looked up, they were able to get a better view of it, or to be more specific, her. Painted in a very bright orange clothes and all with a rope tied tightly around her waist was Yukari. The young witch was thrashing around and trying to untie herself, but found that in the position she was in that the task was difficult, to say the least. Who would do such a thing? Moka frowned up at Yukari, who kept on struggling before turning around to face the somewhat triumphant-looking blonde. "You did this, didn't you?" "I have no clue what you're talking about." He waved off, but the small tug at the corner of his lips gave him away. Her frown deepened in disappointment. "I want you to bring her down." "Why should I?" He arched an eyebrow at her. "I believe the saying goes all's fair in love and war, and I do distinctly remember Yukari-chan declaring war on me. But this is different," she protested. "Look around you, everyone is laughing at her." "That was kinda my goal, Moka-chan." He shrugged before gesturing to the other two with him. "Kuruma-chan and Tsukun aren't laughing." It was true as well, but while they had the decency to not laugh at the scene, they still both looked highly amused. "Fine, then if you won't do it." She turned around and faced the succubus, who stopped looking at Yukari to gaze at her. "Kuruma-chan, can you please fly up there and get her down? We're not allowed to reveal our true forms, remember? That's never mattered to you before." The succubus shrugged before looking back up at the still writhing witch. "Maybe not, but that's beside the point. I'm not getting involved in what they have going on. Besides, what Naruto-kun said is true, she did declare war on him, right?" Seeing that no one out of their little group was going to get the witch down, the vampire huffed and turned away, sending a disappointed look towards the one who was responsible for Yukari's humiliation. "Fine, but you have to get her down when break starts." "Yeah, sure." Yukari clenched her teeth and glared at Naruto, who was standing on the side of the metal pole and untying the rope at the top of it. She ignored all of the yokai down below who had come back to snicker at her. "Are you ready to surrender yet?" he asked her without even sparing a glance. "Bite me," she retorted, and Naruto smirked. He untied the last part of the rope and held it out at arm's length before he began to move it from side to side, with Yukari following as she was still connected. "What about now?" When she just scowled at him, he chuckled and hoisted the rope up until he was holding the orange-colored witch under his arm. Without warning, he jumped off and Yukari yelped as they collided with the ground. He placed the young witch down on her own 2 feet. "Alright, there, go wash up or something unless you want to look like an orange all day." He could have sworn he heard her huff when he turned around and began walking back in the direction he came from. The students who had come back started leaving as well, seeing as there was nothing to point and laugh at anymore. He opened the sliding door to the newspaper club's room once he'd arrived and made his way in, making sure to close it behind him. Everyone that was in the newspaper club was there, with the exception of Jin, but Naruto just guessed that the werewolf was either off flirting with girls or trying to look up their skirts. Tsukun stretched in his chair and glanced at the blonde. "So did you get her down?" Naruto nodded at his question as he sat down at the desk with the drafts he'd been grudgingly working through that he'd left in the same spot the day before. The succubus who had the desk she was sitting at close to Tsukuneso, much so that it was bordering a breach of personal space, looked at him. "You could have taken a picture or something." Naruto shrugged. "I could have, but I didn't. Don't make it sound like I was the only one who could have taken a picture either, you were there and could have too." Gurumu just grunted in acknowledgement before she went back to doing her own draft, even if she'd barely gotten anything done on it in the first place. Moka placed the pencil she'd been using down on her desk and finally spared the blonde with a look. "Where did she go, Naruto-kun?" He tapped the end of his own pencil on the wood of the desk, taking note of the fact that her tone seemed more, what was a good word for it, satisfied. "Maybe. Probably to her dorm room to get rid of all the paint." "Why?" "Because I want to have a talk with her." "Ow. You idiot, why don't you look where you're going?" Already in a sour mood from Naruto's prank, Yukari found herself snapping at whoever it was she'd just blindly walked into after she'd managed to get all the paint off of her and changed into new clothes. She rubbed her nose as that was the part of her body to receive most of the impact and glared up at the person, only to freeze when she realized who it was. The class representative sneered down at her. "You're the one that bumped into me, Yukari-san." The other students that were always with him leered at her maliciously. "How rude, you're a damn shame to this academy." She went to retort, not having any patience to deal with him at the moment, but it died in her mouth when he leaned down, his sneer becoming more venomous. "You've been running around playing pranks on that blonde from the newspaper club, haven't you?" "Yes." She managed out before regaining her courage and scowling at him. What the hell does it matter to you? It matters to me. A forked tongue flicked out of his mouth and Yukari flinched away from it. Because I find it absolutely horrid that such a disgusting creature like you is having fun. Yukari hid a grimace as the already thick air seemed to get thicker, limiting visibility even further. Her mind ran a mile a minute as she tried to figure out a way to escape, as she knew she couldn't take all of them on at once, especially seeing as there was a couple of more students with the class representative than usual. She took a step back and glanced around at the forest she'd been running through. Well, personally I don't really think it's any of your business. Before the witch could even hope to react, the class representative's entire right arm changed. It enlarged to a certain extent, changed into a sickly green color, and grew claws and scales. With his transformed arm, he batted Yukari away, sending her crashing into a tree, and she cried out at the pain. She hefted herself into a sitting position against the tree, breathing deeply as her ribs felt like they'd been broken, though she doubted they had been. Growling caught her attention, and her one opened eye traveled over to where the class representative and his friends, colleagues, assistants, whatever they were, had been. Instead of seeing human flesh, she was met with green, scaly skin. On top of their heads, going down to just below the nape of their neck, was a row of spiky hair in different colors. Their physical size had increased somewhat, but not enough to rip the school clothes they were wearing. Their eyes had become yellow with a slit pupil, like one would find on a reptile, while their hands had grown claws. I think we'd be applauded if we removed a disgusting witch like you, Yukari-san. Going by the cloth that was wound around the one that spoke's arm along with the voice, even if it had become deeper overall, she deducted that he was the class representative immediately. Feeling defiant and obviously not wanting to die, she brought out her wand and stood up on her own 2 feet, doing her best to ignore her ribs for the moment. With a short cry, she charged, her wand held out and ready. The class representative and revealed lizardman sent his jaw forwards and used it to snatch her wand away, holding it in between his sharp teeth, similar to the way a dog would hold a bone. He grabbed the handle of the wand and pulled down, snapping it inside his jaw and sending small bits of it to the forest floor. So, what is she going to be? Food, or just a plain, old and boring corpse? One of the other lizardmen stuck his hand in the air eagerly. Food, she's going to be our food. The class representative spat the object out and threw the handle away. That sounds good to me. His jaw opened wide and the rows of teeth gleamed as he lunged straight at the witch. Stop. The distinctly female voice stopped the lizardman's advances and he glared over at the vampire who was making her way towards them. Stop it. Get your hands off Yukari-chan. So it's you again, Akashi Moka-san. Unfortunately, you've caught us at a bad time. With a snap of his fingers, a lizardman began to move closer to the pinket. Run. Please run, Moka-san. Yukari cried out, not wanting the vampire to be in danger because of her. Just forget about me, you'll be eaten if you stay. It's okay, Yukari-chan, I'll put myself on the line for you. She said firmly, not willing to let her face show that she was worried, as that would be a sign of weakness and the lizardman would take full advantage of it. It's alright to ask for help when you can't make it on your own, you know. Moka-san, you have to run. Don't you under? The vampire interrupted her. Be honest, Yukari-chan. You say that you love me, but all you really want is for someone to pay attention to you, right? She smiled at Yukari's incredulous expression. I've seen you lately, Yukari-chan, I mean really seen you. When you're not trying to prank Naruto-kun, or when he's not pranking you, you feel lonely, don't you? What are you talking about? The witch yelled back. Just hurry up and get out of here already. I understand, you know, she continued, causing the witch to stare at her. I can see it in your eyes, Yukari-chan. You've always been lonely, haven't you? It was tough being all alone, wasn't it? She smiled a bit brighter. I too was always alone. That's why I want to help you, and also why I won't leave you alone here, Yukari-chan. The witch's eyes flew wide open at the confession, while the lizardman snorted at her. What are you blathering about? His teeth glinted menacingly when he sneered. Are you trying to insult us by ignoring us? Just as the lizardmen who were seemingly acting as the class representative subordinates began to move on Moka, an amused voice rang out, catching everyone's attention. Knowing Moka-chan, probably not. Branches shook around them, but when they looked in that direction, there was no one there. Though I have to say, the whole lizard thing you've got going on really fits in well with your sleazy guy attitude. Show yourself, coward. Now, coaxing me like that won't work. The voice scolded and the lizardman's nostrils flared. Another branch shook and his reptilian eyes darted to it, but got the same results as before. After all, I have the advantage, and if I was to just show myself now, I'd be giving that away. So you're just going to hide? Fine, then we'll just eat these 2 girls and you can stay there. The tap on his shoulder caused him to turn his head behind him, and his yellow eyes widened when he saw Naruto smiling casually at him. Well, in all honesty, I don't need that advantage against people like you. A quick flash of blonde, spiky hair and the lizardman found himself spitting out blood as he soared back until he began smashing through several trees. "Naruto-kun?" Moka asked in surprise. Yukari was leaning up against the tree and staring at the blonde, her mouth unmoving. Finally, she managed to get out. "What are you doing here?" "Ah, well, you know." He grabbed the claw that had been thrust at his kidney and used it to flip the lizardman over onto his back before twisting, breaking the ulna, radius and all of the small carpal bones in one swift move. Well, that's what they were called on humans, he had no clue about lizards. The lizardman cried out, but Yukari ignored it. "That's not the answer I wanted." "You don't always get what you want." He shot back, ducking under a claw swipe and bringing his leg up into the yokai's chest, sending him rocketing into the air well above the tree line. He's blasting off again. He flipped upright, sending a beepy smirk at the last lizardman who recklessly charged him. He moved his body to the side as his opponent made an attempt at swallowing him whole, before bringing up his leg and smashing it into the back of the yokai's knee, toppling him over. The last thing the student saw was the underside of Naruto's shoe before everything went dark. "Why?" Naruto's attention was drawn over to Yukari, who was staring questioningly at him with Moka by her side, having obviously gone there while Naruto had been fighting. "Why did you come here? Wouldn't it have been better for you to just leave me on my own?" "Ah, who knows? Maybe, maybe not." He shrugged. "It's not like I could have just let you die out here though. I've gotta annoy someone in my spare time, right?" She smiled weakly. "I guess so." "So, does this mean you still consider me dangerous?" "Of course." She deadpanned. "If anything, this just proves that you're even more dangerous." "But I just saved you." He protested before huffing when he saw a smirk start to form on her face. Moka giggled at their interactions. "Come on, let's go back to the newspaper club. Maybe you can join as well, Yukari-chan." Jin closed the sliding door behind him before making his way around the newspaper club's room to hand everyone a slip of paper that they didn't bother looking at straight away and not really taking notice of the additional person. Once his task was done, he walked up to the front of the room and behind the desk. "Alright everyone, pay attention." Moka put the art book she'd been reading down on her desk and gave the surprisingly serious-looking werewolf her attention, along with the others in the room. "What are we supposed to be paying attention to, senpai?" Naruto asked, his elbow on the desk he was sitting at his chin resting in his palm. His senior put the newspaper he'd been holding flat on the desk and surveyed the room, making sure they were paying attention before his eyes landed on Yukari and he arched an eyebrow, finally noticing her. "Who's she?" "Sendo Yukari, a witch and a new member in this club," she introduced, having moved her desk herself to sit between Naruto and Moka so she could both be next to the vampire and keep an eye on the blonde as, technically, their war was still going. "Alright, whatever." He waved off, grabbing a piece of chalk and writing disappearance on the board. "Anyway, the reason I came here is this recent missing girls problem that has come up." "Missing girls?" Sukun repeated while the three females in the room decided to pay more attention. "That's what I said, Sukun-kun, but I don't remember asking for a parrot." The human huffed, Naruto smirked and Jin rolled his eyes before continuing, his tone taking on that seriousness it had before. "Back to the subject, several missing female students have vanished without a trace lately, one after another. 7, to be more specific, in just a single month." He placed his hands on the desk on either side of the newspaper. "Now, admittedly, it's not at all unusual for people to go missing in this school, but don't you think these numbers are unusual?" Naruto grabbed the slip of paper Jin had handed around before and gave it a look over. "The number 7 is an unusual number." "No, you idiot." Jin snapped and Naruto scowled at him. "It's the fact that there's 7 females that have gone missing, not the number itself." "You should be more specific then." Sukun sighed. "Can we just get on with this?" Jin grunted but obliged. "I've collected some basic information on these girls and, as you can see on those pictures, all of them are pretty hot. If someone is holding them hostage, then I want to save them somehow." Naruto rolled his eyes, having a gut feeling as to where his senior was going with his words. "After all, if they see me in a good light, I'll get a chance to get to know them better." Going by the lecherous smirk that had formed on the werewolf's face and the way his words were phrased, he guessed his gut feeling was correct. Sukun shook his head. "I should have expected something like this." Moka, Kurumu and Yukari, however, didn't seem amused or exasperated in the least and were sending the president of their club dirty looks. "So how do you plan on saving them then, senpai?" Jin chose to ignore the lack of actual interest in Naruto's tone and sat down before answering. "Have you guys do it while I take all the credit with the girls." The blonde huffed through his nose while the others chose to ignore their conversation and went back to what they had been doing beforehand. "And you think we'll do it even after you've said that?" "Of course." He kicked his legs up onto the desk and leaned back in his chair. After all, you guys are my underlings, so you have to do what I tell you to. That's not true. Yukari decided to pipe in. As our senior and club's president, you're supposed to help us out, not order us around like you say. I'm different. In what way? Then he trailed off, not actually having a reply to that which could ensure his victory in their small argument. Just because. When he saw everyone else in his club staring at him, he crumbled. Alright. I'll figure something out, maybe. Good. Naruto smirked at the werewolf who sent him an accusing stare for bringing up the subject in the first place. We wouldn't want our club's president to abandon us like that. If anything, the stare just worsened at his words. The second year sighed, Naruto was really laying it on heavy with the use of such an emphasis on his title of president. And going by the way his junior's lips were slightly curved upwards as he did his newspaper drafts, he'd wager that the blonde knew exactly what he was doing. Later, Naruto-kun, Sukun-kun. I'll see the two of you tomorrow. Naruto glanced to the side and saw that the vampire had stopped walking to wave at them while she was a few feet away. Going somewhere? Yep. She nodded and brought her art book out to show them. I got asked by the art teacher to be a model for a picture, so I won't be able to go to the dorms with the two of you for the rest of the week. Is that why you were reading that book before? Yeah, it is. Naruto shrugged, ignoring the way she shuffled on her feet as if she was nervous. Well, have fun then, and I guess we'll see you tomorrow. He took a step in the direction of the dorms when he heard Moka call out to him. Wait a minute, Naruto-kun. He stopped, turned around and before he could even ask what, the vampire was upon him, her arms strung around his neck with her fangs digging in eagerly. He wrapped his arms around her to keep her steady and sighed. You know, Moka-chan, it'd be nice if you asked every once in a while, instead of just digging in. When she'd had her fill, she removed her fangs and smiled apologetically at him. Sorry, Naruto-kun, but I can't hold myself back for long, I'll try to remember to ask from now on though. Don't worry about it. They untangled themselves and Naruto fixed up his shirt as it had been messed up when she was basically rubbing herself all over him. When they'd said their goodbyes, Naruto and Sukun continued making their way to their respective dorm rooms. You've been awfully quiet, you know. Have I? Yeah, what's wrong? Nothing, just thinking about stuff. Like? Upcoming birthdays. Whose birthday is it? Vroom. Sukun's hand went up and over his own head while the blonde blinked at him. That was the sound of my hint going straight over your head. Upcoming birthdays isn't much to go on. He protested. It's my birthday coming up soon, Naruto. How soon? June 22nd soon. Ah. He sighed, idly scratching at the back of his head. Well, you should have told me earlier, I would have gotten you something. It's fine, I didn't really expect anything, just wanted you to know. Naruto hummed as they kept walking, their shoes crunching along the path. I wonder if Kurama-chan's present for you will be her friest's. As the blonde had expected, Sukun's face did a very good impersonation of one of those red light bulbs on a Christmas tree. What? Ah, well, you know, he sent a smirk towards the other human who had clamped a hand over his nose. I did accidentally grab them once, so I was just thinking about how much of a good present they'd be all things considered. Soft, yet firm and large enough to get an entire handful. At the blonde's description, Sukun found out that his hand was no longer able to hold back the blood that shot out of his nose, while his eyes rolled into the back of his head and his back hit the ground. Naruto snorted with a grin. You really can't take a joke, can you? Sukun simply mumbled something incoherent in reply. He woke up throwing the covers off himself. He could feel his heart racing in what could be surprise or panic, maybe even both, and his eyes were wide open and alert despite the fact he'd only just woken up. He hastily made his way over to his window and pulled the curtains aside roughly, staring out into the dead-looking forest that was illuminated by the moonlight. There was something out there far away, something familiar. It was faint, terribly so, almost as if something was muffling or possibly even blocking it to a certain degree, but it was there nonetheless. His grip tightened on the curtain he was still holding, the brain in his skull racing at a mile a minute so fast he couldn't even understand his own thoughts. Calm down, Naruto. Breathe. He flinched at the deep rumble, but relaxed a second later when he remembered who had spoken and did as told. His hands came back down and he rested them on the windowsill, leaning on them slightly. Think first, have a panic attack later. He didn't even blink at the Biju's attempt at a lighter tone, but he again decided to listen. It's not possible, is it? I mean, I know that. I know, but it apparently doesn't seem that way. He took another calming breath, his heart rate slowed down, but it was still faster than it should be. Well, actually, I guess it's not entirely impossible, given the circumstances, but still. Kurama sighed. Your reaction is understandable, but it's not needed. Not yet, anyway. Yeah, you're right. His heart rate began to slow down until it was at normal speed once again. I guess I should get some sleep though, it is still a school night and all. Even as he drew his covers back over himself, he knew he wouldn't be able to get even a wink of sleep in. Did you come up with a plan yet? Naruto was sitting on the desk he usually sat at when he was in the newspaper club, his legs were crossed with a blonde brow raised in questioning at the werewolf. They were the only two in the room at the moment, seeing as classes were still on. His legs kicked up on the desk at the front of the room while leaning back on the chair and fiddling with his pendant, Jin answered without looking up. Not a plan, per se. I did sniff around literally for the scent of a group of females in one spot, as their smell is different, but I couldn't find anything. It's not much of a surprise that you've basically memorized a female's scent. Jin ignored his jab and continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. I also questioned some students and teachers who I suspected. Let me guess, they were females. Jin looked up and scowled at him. Stop interrupting me. Sorry. He apologized half-heartedly. It was a serious question though. His senior dug into his pocket and brought out a scrunched-up piece of paper before tossing it to him. Like I said, I questioned teachers and students, none of them really stood out exponentially, but the ones who did stand out even slightly were written down on that paper you have in your hand right now. He unfurled the paper and read what was on it. Ishigami-sensei, the art teacher, Kitsubo-sensei, the gym teacher, and some guy named Kaio who's in the public safety committee. He placed the paper in his lap and stared at Jin, who had put his hands behind his head and was slowly rocking back and forth on the chair. What are the reasons for those three specifically? You're going to fall off of that, by the way. Nah, I'll be fine. He kept rocking, but he did look at him. I'll start off with Ishigami. The reason she's on there is that she has taught a majority the students who have gone missing, and I hear that she's rather popular with the girls of this school, which would make it easy for her to abduct them. Alright. He made a motion with his hand for him to go on. And Kitsubo-sensei. Similar to Ishigami's, actually. He's the only gym teacher in the school at the moment, which means that he's had classes with all of these girls at least once. He's also supposed to be popular among the girls here. How so? He's a gym teacher. The werewolf said as if it explained it all, but Naruto just stared blankly at him. You know, fit, mature, older girls these days like that kind of stuff. He sighed remorsefully. A shame, too, all those young beauties wasted on someone like him. Anyway, Naruto said, trying to get the conversation moving. Kaio of the Public Safety Committee. Jin's expression darkened, he stopped rocking on the chair and his eyes glazed over slightly, as if he was remembering something. It only lasted a second before he seemed to snap out of it, a grim smile on his face instead. There's quite a few reasons for him, actually. He's the head of the committee, and he's a cruel bastard, to say the least. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if these abductions were played out just to provide him with some amusement. Naruto would bet a frown came to his face when he sensed the emotions coming from the second year. Past experiences with him. You could say that. He ran a hand through his hair and closed his eyes. Of course, I don't have any solid proof to lay the blame on any of these three, but I'd wager a few thousand in cold hard cash that it's one of them. Naruto perked up. Do you want to make a bet on it? No. Jin fixed him with an annoyed look. I heard what you did to those casinos in Vegas. Naruto huffed, feeling somewhat offended. You make it sound like I robbed them or something. You might as well have. He rolled his eyes, that wasn't true. Whatever. Did you end up getting anything out of the three of them? Nothing solid. Jin answered quickly, a bit too quickly. When I did question them, it was mostly just changes in facial expressions, clenched teeth, twitches, that sort of stuff. Okay, a bit of a twist in the truth. He had spoken to Ishigami and Kitsubo, he'd just avoided Kaio. Besides, even if it was Kaio who'd done it, it wasn't like they'd be able to do anything against him. Naruto's mouth became a thin line. He felt as if Jin was telling the truth, mostly anyway, but it was as if the werewolf was holding something back. He shook it off, whatever it was could wait, he supposed. What do you plan on doing next then, President? Jin gave him a look for using his title in that way again. I don't know, why don't you try doing something for once? Because you're the president of this club. Naruto retorted before rolling his eyes when Jin scowled at him. Alright, fine, I'll sneak around and see what I can find. But you owe me, senpai. Sneaky wasn't his style. Naruto had known that already, of course, but it didn't help the fact that he was annoyed at what he was doing. He much preferred face-to-face confrontations. His shoes hit the ceiling with every step he took, making light thudding sounds every time that were beginning to drive him insane with their monotonous repetition. The halls of Yokai Academy were dark, the shadows of the many dead trees outside could be seen courtesy of the currently crescent-shaped moon's light. It was quiet too, and Naruto didn't like it. If there was anything he'd learnt in his life, it was that quiet was bad. Things just didn't go smoothly for him in situations where he could be killed if he were caught, ever. Like that one time when he'd snuck into Saratobi's office at around 5 years of age with various items, paint bombs, wire, and a bag filled with the stuff the Hokage had used to fill his pipe with. He remembered getting into the office without much trouble, even going as far as reaching the Sandayami's desk really quietly, then creak. He couldn't remember exactly what had happened, but within the next second he remembered finding himself pinned to the floor with a kunai at his throat, with the form of a surprised-looking Saratobi hovering over him. He hadn't realized it back then, but if the Hokage had let his instinctual reactions get the better of him for just a second longer, then he would have been killed by his grandfather figure, no less. "Stop it," he told himself, his lips in a firm line. "You need to keep moving." He reached his destination, the art room, the only place in the entire school he could actually sense multiple Yoki signatures in one spot. Still stuck to the ceiling, he slid the door open as quietly as he could. There was a small sound, like one would hear when one of those trolley things that held trays filled all sorts of medicine rolled along the floor of a hospital. He'd heard plenty of those. As soon as he entered, the sound of sobbing reached his ears. Being the heroic and gracious person he was, definitely not a biased opinion, he of course made his way over there without any hesitation. He dropped to the floor and made his way over, his shoes making a slightly different sound, but it didn't help the fact that he felt like going insane. With each step he took, the sobbing grew louder, and he soon found himself standing in front of a rectangular metal box, with a set of 4 grates near the top of it standing up vertically. He couldn't see very well in the dark, but there was enough moonlight coming in that he could tell he was in the corner of the room, opposite the sliding door and up the front. There was definitely someone in there. As soon as the obvious thought came into his mind, he felt like punching himself. He resisted the urge and grasped the lock that had been placed on the box in a firm grip. He pulled, and when the steel, upside-down U that was responsible for locking it seemed to groan in protest, he just pulled harder until there was a satisfying snap. The lock came flying off, and Naruto found he'd used quite a lot of force in pulling, as it was flung out of his hand and carried by the momentum before it clanged somewhere on the opposite side of the room. He pulled the entrance door of the metal box open, and what he saw made him blink. It was a statue made of stone, that much he was completely sure of, but it had sobs emanating from it, while petrified tears seemed to run down the face that wore a terrified expression. "Okay, that's kinda weird." He waited, expecting a snort or some sort of sarcastic remark on how obvious his statement was to come from the biju inside of him, but there was nothing. Oh well, the damn fox was probably being lazy and sleeping again. He waited. Yeah, if Kurama didn't react to that, then he was sleeping. Before he could hope to do anything, though, he heard the sliding door to the art room begin open, and strangely enough the sobbing stopped. The rash side of his brain kicked in, and he slammed the metal door closed, causing a rather loud bang. He wasn't done yet, however, and he rammed his back into it, tilting the entire rectangular box backwards until it hit the wall. What was that? Who's there? He groaned in faux pain, and he could almost picture whoever was there giving his position their full attention. He got off the rectangular box, held his shoulder as if he was in pain, and forced on a grimace. "It's just me," he called out in what he hoped was a non-hostile tone. The lights flickered on, and Naruto was greeted to the side of the art teacher, Ishigami, giving him a dark look as her hand came down to rest at her sides again. The expression only stayed for a second though, and when he blinked he saw her giving him a more of an annoyed and exasperated look. "You're Naruto-kun, right? One of Moka-san's friends." "Yeah." He hoped it sounded weak. "I am, but how did you know?" Her expression softened. "She's one of my students, she talks about you sometimes, actually." "Really?" He didn't need to fake his surprise. "Why?" She shrugged. "I don't know, but she seems to have a soft spot for you." She gained a stern look. "But that doesn't matter right now, what does matter is why you're sneaking around in my art room at this time of night. You should be at your dorm sleeping." "Yeah, sorry." He apologized with as much sincerity he could muster in the situation he'd found himself in. He'd known there was teachers in the school, probably some students stealing sheets to cheat from, too, but he'd foolishly ignored them as they had been a fair distance away. When he saw her looking at him expectantly, he went on. "I really like art, sensei. Drawing, painting, all those things just really grab my attention, do you know what I mean?" "Most certainly. But I don't want others to find out, you see. It's kind of embarrassing for me." He grimaced again, tightening the grip on his shoulder to keep up his act. "I just ran out of supplies, too, so I thought that I'd come to the art room and steal some. Borrow some supplies, just for a short time. I would have brought them back." He sighed, dropping his head so she couldn't see his expression. Something he guessed that people who were embarrassed did when they had been caught doing something they shouldn't be doing. "I can't see well in the dark though, sensei, and I ended up running in that thing," he gestured to the tilted metal box. "And hurting my shoulder pretty badly." "Well," she said, sighing tiredly. At least you were honest about it, and for that I won't issue you a punishment. Her stern look came back with a vengeance. But if I ever see or hear of you doing something like this again, then there will be punishment, do you understand? Yes, sensei. He murmured, feeling relieved, and he hoped it showed on his face. I'll be going now. Did she roll her eyes? Yes, yes, and make sure to see the nurse in the morning about that shoulder of yours. She moved to the side and swept her arm, a gesture for him to hurry up and leave. Moka looked up, her green eyes settling on the woman at the front of the class, the teacher, a 30-year-old looking woman with an hergless figure, braided hair, a bandana on the top of her head, a tube top, slim jeans, a golden necklace, and to finish it off was a long white trench coat that reached her ankles with. Even though Moka couldn't see the entire coat, she'd wager that it had paint on it in some areas. Okay, in art class today, you'll be painting pictures continuing with last week's theme of what's important to you. The teacher Ishigami announced, her hands twitched every so often as if she wanted to finish a masterpiece, and when she pronounced the letter S, there was a slight hiss in her tone that was almost unnoticeable. And just what is important to you is the art in each and every one of your hearts. So feel free to paint whatever you want. Moka smiled, she enjoyed art class, it let her imagination run free, and it was something that she could put her emotions into. The teacher wasn't bad either, she was passionate about the subject, and she would give pointers and constructive criticism to her students. She looked down at her desk, which was slightly larger than normal ones, that had her A3-sized art book resting on it, with a blank page open. She could hear students talking amongst themselves or to Ishigami, probably to ask for help. She tried to pay them no attention and concentrate, but it wasn't exactly easy, considering she didn't have anything specific to concentrate on in the first place. The girl leaned in through one of the open windows at the side of the classroom and waved at the art teacher, a cheerful smile on her face. Hey sensei, I'm skipping my gym class to have fun with you. Oh, you. She waved off with a flattered smile before walking over and starting a conversation with the girl. Moka tried to settle on something specific, but couldn't. She had a few good ideas running around in her head, which was the reason as to why she couldn't decide. She was so in thought that when she heard Ishigami ask her what she was planning to do, she squeaked and reflexively covered her art book, even though there was nothing on there. Ah, sensei. She murmured, a small, embarrassed blush on her face, once she'd realized her position. Sorry, I wasn't concentrating. It's alright, there's nothing to be sorry for. Ishigami smiled, but there was a predatory gleam in her eye similar to one a snake would get when they their eyes on their food. She pushed the thoughts away and smiled back, her arms coming to rest back in their previous position. Seeing she now had her students' attention, she decided to ask her question again. So do you have anything in mind yet, Moka-san? Well, she shuffled around on her seat nervously, the flush on her face simmering down to a much smaller scale. I've got a few ideas, but I can't decide on what one. Ishigami simply smiled once again, the predatory gleam remaining. It's because you're overthinking it. She brought up her index finger and lightly tapped it on her chest, right above her heart. Like I said before, this is about what's important to you, so you've got to let your heart decide, not your brain. I know that, but… Here Ishigami leaned down so she was eye level with the vampire, and her smile widened slightly. Let me see if I can help you out. When the class had finished and students including herself had began to file out, she felt a hand grab her arm roughly and hold her in place, 2 meters from the door. She turned her head back and saw her teacher standing there, stopping her from moving. Sensei. Ishigami smiled, her eyes gaining that same predatory gleam they had before, making the vampire nervous. Sorry. She said, but she didn't sound very sincere. But I can't let you go, we have some things to discuss. Hey, what are you two talking about? Naruto glanced behind him at the succubus who had asked the question. She was sitting at one of the desks in the front row of the class, leaning back, unknowingly pushing her fists up and looking at him and the werewolf beside him. Yukari was in the desk beside her, some weird ball that the blonde really didn't care to ask about on it. Jin and himself were at the side of the room, looking out the window and talking about what he had found the night before in the art room. It's nothing important, Kurumu-chan. He said dismissively before looking back out the window again, ignoring the small huff that he heard come from her. So, about the statue you were telling me about. Jin trailed off, letting him continue telling him what he had found. Yeah, it was a statue. He rolled his eyes when Jin looked at him expectantly, as if he was telling him to say more on the matter. What do you want me to tell you? It was a statue of a girl, it had tears running down its face, and there was someone alive inside of it. And it was on its own. It was in a metal, rectangular just big enough to fit one person, so yeah, there was only one. The werewolf wrinkled his nose at the way he'd phrased his retort but didn't comment and instead reached into his pocket before bringing out a piece of paper with a photo of a very familiar looking girl or statue on it. I needed to know because this girl went missing yesterday, not very long after I spoke to you, actually. Seem familiar. He took the piece of paper and looked it over, making sure there was nothing outstanding that was different. He didn't want to say oh, yeah, this is the girl, only for it not to be. And he certainly didn't want to say no, it's not her, completely different girl, senpai either. Yeah, almost exact replica of the statue. Almost. Well, you know, without the stone coating. Jin looked like he was about to say something, maybe complain about his reply, but Yukari's voice suddenly cried out. Guys. There's a bad aura enveloping Moka-san. Acting on instincts at the worried tone of the witch, he delved into his negative emotion sensing ability. The negative emotions that he could always feel from around the school, amplified when he concentrated on them: anger, jealousy, annoyance, hate, sadness, all kinds of stuff. He pushed past it and zeroed in on Moka and anyone within a few meters of her person. Fear and obviously hostile intentions reached him within a second after Yukari's declaration, and he turned around, making his way towards the door. Yeah, I got it, Yukari-chan. Even if I think that divination stuff you're doing is— he pursed his lips, thinking of the right word. Inaccurate, I'll believe you this time. Bye. The door rolled shut behind him, muffling Yukari's infuriated shout and Jin's annoyed grunt at his sudden departure. She'd managed to yank her arm away from Ishigami, thankfully, and create some space between them, around 3 or 4 meters. Ishigami removed the bandana that had been atop her head and put it in one of her coat pockets. Moka's attention went to the top of the older woman's head and found something she'd rather not see, ever. Her once braided hair had transformed into what looked like hundreds of different snakes, all flailing and curling around each other, as if they had a mind of their own. They weren't exactly snakes though, she could tell that much. They didn't have eyes, for one, and the fangs they had were way oversized, not to mention they were much more grotesque looking overall. What's happening to you all of a sudden, Ishigami-sensei? She cried, taking more and more steps away from her art teacher, but Ishigami just took steps forwards to match her pace. Your hair, it's like snakes. Yes, I changed my hair, thanks for noticing. Do you like it? She smiled and squinted her eyes, an expression that her homeroom teacher, Nekonim, usually wore, just without the glasses. But I'm afraid that this has to be done. You see, your friend, Naruto-kun saw more than I would have liked last night, and I might need a bargaining chip. What are you talking about? The vampire asked hesitantly. She stopped moving backwards when her back hit a door, and she tensed while Ishigami kept moving onwards, a cold glint appearing in her eyes when she opened them. Don't worry, my dear, you won't even feel a thing. With that set of words said, the snakes that acted as hair launched forward as if by some silent order. Before Moka could react, one of the snakes had latched onto her left wrist with enough force that it sent her crashing through the door. She winced and bit back a groan. The sound of sobbing reached her ears and she got up on her knees, surveying the area she'd been forced into. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw numerous statuettes, she counted, littered around the room, all in different poses. They all had tears streaming down their faces, horrified expressions, and were all statues of girls. What is this? She made a move to stand up, but on the way she found her left hand wasn't responding to her. She looked down and was once again surprised to see it coated in stone. My hand's covered in stone. It's the Medusa power of transformation into stone. The familiar voice of Ishigami declared, followed by the sounds of footsteps and quiet hissing. Moka turned her head around to see her art teacher walking through the broken doorway. Anything bitten by one of my snake-like hairs will turn into stone. You, too, will be turned into stone just like those girls you see. She gripped her stone-covered hand, as if holding it would help in some way. Then all these statues are? Yes. She answered for her, a wicked grin playing on her lips. They're all the beautiful students of this academy, don't you think it's fantastic? That's when Moka noticed, her face had changed somewhat. Mottled lines had formed under her eyes, and she had grown fangs that showed in her grin. She was going to say they weren't fantastic, stall and try to figure a way out, but Ishigami was having none of it. Her hair lunged forwards again, going further than it should have been possible given the teacher's actual hair length. The door rolled open and there was a slamming sound, followed by a blur of blonde and something shiny, and Moka suddenly found Naruto standing in front of her, one of those tri-pronged kunais held in his hands, while the heads of Ishigami's hair were on the floor, writhing around and snapping at nothing. Geez, he complained, pinching the bride of his nose. Why do all the enemies go after you? Am I not important enough or something? Moka blinked incredulously, while Ishigami seemed to be a vibrating ball of rage. She murmured as her face decided to take on the rage she was feeling. Her expression turned into a snarl, nostrils flaring while the snakes on her head snapped at anything in range, seemingly going into their own frenzy. You killed my snakes. Well, not really, the blonde pointed to the wriggling around heads that were still snapping. One had even managed to latch onto another and was in the middle of devouring it. I mean, look, they're still moving, so they're alive. Get your facts straight, lady. The already rather horrid look on Ishigami's face worsened, becoming more grotesque than it already was. The snakes on top of her head stopped acting randomly and looked directly at Naruto, as if they had just been ordered to turn him into a garden ornament. They lunged forward and Naruto rolled his eyes. Moka couldn't really tell, but the kunai he was holding seemed to get some sort of glow to it. There was power coming from it, she realized. He was pouring the chakra that he used into it. He flicked his wrist and the kunai flew forwards, going straight in between all Ishigami's hair. But despite this, all of the snakes were suddenly torn to shreds at random points, the little bits of them falling to the floor and wriggling around. The head snapped at anything they could reach while the parts that couldn't just moved around on their own. Ishigami screamed at the sight while that had kept going straight for her, stopped around a meter in front of her body, being held in place by his hand. He sighed, and Moka stared at the two of them. She hadn't seen him move, not even a blur or any sort of sign that he'd moved in the first place. He was in one place, then he was in another. You're all the same. Was that a slight whine to his voice? Anyone I fight seems to just get angry when they start losing. It'd be more fun if you actually thought things through, that way I can kick your ass some more. Ishigami stared at him, eyes full of rage and a hint of fear. What? Moka saw him wrinkle his nose in distaste, or maybe it was displeasure. I don't like that either. How when you know you're going to lose you don't do anything, people like you always just stand there and take it. Do you think I want to just beat on someone who's not moving? How boring. But, Ishigami mumbled. She went in for a slap something. But Naruto just grabbed her hand and huffed. Don't bother. He snapped irritably. It's too late now, I shouldn't have to tell you what to do. Before Ishigami could even open her mouth, he already had his fist buried into her gut and her body went slack. All the same stuff over and over. Naruto-kun why are you complaining? Moka asked tentatively as he let Ishigami's body drop to the floor with a thud. Ah, it's nothing. He said dismissively before turning around to face her, a small smile on his face. Come on, let's get out of here. We'll go get the others and bring these statues, girls, whatever, to the infirmary. We need to get that hand checked out too. Sukun, why are you staring out the window? Naruto tapped the pencil in his hands on his desk, sending an annoyed stare to the human who had turned away from the window to look at him blankly. Well, I just kind of realized that the seasons don't change here. He grabbed his blazer as if he was showing it to him. I mean we're still in the winter uniform. He rolled his eyes. Wow, what a thing to take notice of. He drawled and Sukun crossed his arms in a huff. Get back to your work already, your birthday was yesterday, not today, so you don't get the day off again. Sukun pursed his lips, Naruto was betting that he'd enjoyed his day off. You know, you just acted more like the club's president in a few short seconds than Jin has since we joined. Yeah. Yukari agreed, sitting at the desk she'd moved in between Naruto and Moka. Nothing unusual. She gestured to Jin who was reclining in his chair with a coffee in his hand. Just look at him, he's like one of those fan fiction authors who lays around and don't pay attention to their stories. Just replace the coffee with a pizza and soda combo, then he'd be an exact replica. I'm not lazing around. Jin protested, taking a sip of his coffee without even bothering to look up from the newspaper held in his free hand. Yes, you are. Moka piped up. Naruto saw Jin's lips form a firm line. Okay, maybe I am. But it doesn't matter, I don't need to do the work. See? Yukari frowned, stood up and pointed to him. He's exactly like those fan fiction authors that are always saying oh, it's just fan fiction, who cares or my life is more important than fan fiction bah. She threw her hands up in the air and sat back down, huffing through her nose. Then they don't update for months and when they do, they wonder why no one is reading their story anymore. Wow, Naruto mumbled, slightly awed by the young witch's rant. That was something else, Yukari-chan. She beamed at him while Kurumu stretched in her chair and let out a yawn. Fan fiction authors and useless presidents aside, she ignored Jin's glare. I don't think I can take much more of this. It's Saturday, I want to do something, not sit around like this. Yeah, well, we're all stuck here, Kurumu-chan. But if Senpai actually did something, it'd go a lot faster. Naruto gave Jin a pointed look, but he ignored it. The succubus groaned and leaned over, resting her head on Tsukun's shoulder as their desks were close together, well-said human looked away. Ah, you're my only safe haven, Tsukun. Boring. That was probably the best word to describe handing out newspapers that was in Naruto's vocabulary. He scowled as he handed another paper to a boy who looked disappointed that he was the one handing it to him. Don't want it. Leave. He snapped and the boy jumped before grabbing the newspaper and leaving. He sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Maybe snapping at people like that wasn't the best idea, but it wasn't his fault. He had came to the school at first because he thought it'd give him a chance to have a life without being in life and death situations all the time, but the truth was that's exactly what he wanted. It was basically in his blood to risk his life all the time. It only made it worse that there was usually someone to fight, but they weren't really providing any competition for him. It was annoying him, and he was getting restless. Coming to a school probably hadn't been his best idea, it was like he was locked in a cage, a large cage with his friends, but a cage nonetheless. He took a deep breath and let it out through his nose before glancing around at the other members of his club, the friends he'd made. They were smiling as they handed out newspapers, even Tsukun, though he did look a bit miffed whenever he handed someone a newspaper who ended up getting a disappointed expression. He straightened up and forced on an easy smile before handing a newspaper to an admittedly cute girl. Out of the corner of his eyes he saw Kurumu glump Tsukun and smash his head between her fists, exclaiming how happy she was that the newspaper was so popular. A small chuckle escaped him. Maybe Kurumu's present for him had been her fists after all. "I'm scared. Lolicans are scawy," Yukari cried as she ran away from a flock of male students. He put it to the back of his mind and picked up a newspaper from the stand they were handing out the papers at. At least all the work we've been doing for these isn't for nothing. He put the paper down and glanced over to the side when he felt a familiar Yoki approaching and saw Jin approaching with his hands in his pockets. He arched an eyebrow. As far as he knew, Jin was pretty lazy and didn't show much care or interest in the club at all, just his own benefits. "How's it going? Are you giving out lots of copies?" "Oh, hi, senpai," Moka greeted in a cheerful mood. Jin surveyed the area with his eyes and saw all the people surrounding the stand that Kurumu was currently attending to. He looked pleased, glad, even. "It looks like it's a pretty big hit, huh?" Jin smiled slightly, but it wasn't the smile he showed off to girls he was trying to woo. It was a smile one would get when they saw something that was once broken get fixed. "We might even need to start charging for these." "That's fine with me," Senpai Naruto smirked at his senior and decided to take a jab at him. "But you wouldn't get any of the money we'd make, seeing as you don't ever do any of the work." The werewolf huffed through his nose. "I would get some of the money, maybe around a quarter or something. I'm the president, right?" "That's what you're supposed to be," Naruto retorted, idly aware of Tsukun rolling his eyes. "You're more like a reader, though, or even a guinea pig. You just sit around and read the stuff we write." "Yeah." Tsukun agreed, jumping into the conversation with a newspaper held in his hands. "Maybe if you helped handing out these newspapers we'd think of you as more than just a guinea pig, which is down at the bottom of the ladder, right under nearly useless." Jin snatched the paper out of Tsukun's hands. "Fine." He sneered, but there was no denying the mirth in his eyes. Frightened shouts, yelps and murmurs broke out in the crowd that had gathered around their club stand. Students parted, and a team of yokai strolled through their black suits, either stoic or dark expressions, the air of superiority about them, and the way they were pushing people out of their way, kind of reminded Naruto of Sasuke. One of them was also telling the students to make way for them, as if they were over 9,000 times more important than everyone. "What's going on?" Tsukun asked as all of them looked at the scene. "Well, Tsukun, they're pushing and shoving," Naruto remarked offhandedly, placing his hands on the stand and leaning his weight on them slightly, ignoring Tsukun's annoyed glare that he could feel piercing the back of his head. All of them stopped in front of the stand, and Naruto could tell they were putting all their effort into looking intimidating. His eyes zeroed in on the one in the middle. He had the strongest yoki out of all of them by a long shot, so much so that compared to him the other yokai in black suits looked like cheap rip-offs. He had blonde hair like him, only it was darker and reached his waist in length. Two cold, harsh and sadistic golden eyes were planted in his eye sockets, right below two eyebrows that might as well have just been dots on his face. He had pointed ears, like one would expect an elf to have, or someone dressing up as an elf for Halloween. So, naturally, Naruto thought the guy looked like he should be wearing a shirt that said, "I'm a lummox." He cracked a smile as the lummox gave a short bow, his hand resting over his heart with a mocking smile that actually fit his face, rather well as if he'd had a lot of spare time staring in a mirror and practicing. "Salutations. I am Kaio, the manager of the Public Safety Committee. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance." "Yeah, nice to meet you, too," Naruto said, his eyes briefly flickering over to the stoic Jin before they rested on Kaio again. "Okay, seeing as you don't look like you know the drill, I'll let you know." He straightened up and hoped he looked professional. "Normally, we don't greet each other like that, we just give you the newspaper and you leave." He raised his eyebrows and leaned forwards, very aware of the tense atmosphere. "Wanna give it a shot?" Snickers and chuckles were muffled by coughs in the crowd of students. Beside him, Tsukun looked away in an attempt to hide his smirk. Kaio's eyes narrowed at him. "Unfortunately, we're not here to receive one of your newspapers. We're here to ask a simple question." "Wow." Naruto whistled. "Must be one important question if so many of you showed up to ask it. So, what? Do you want me to answer whatever question you have one person at a time, or do you want to find out the answer as a group?" He could feel that Jin was anxious, and he heard a set of coughs around him from Tsukun, Kurumu and Moka respectively. A flash of anger entered Kaio's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by cold glee, as if Kaio was planning to slaughter his favorite teddy bear. Naruto guessed it was the best part of his day. The question is, who gave you permission to hand out a newspaper with the contents that it possesses? He planted the tips of his fingers on the stand and leaned forward, leveling Naruto with a challenging glare, as if to say, I'm going to tear your club down, and you won't be able to do a thing about it. Naruto smiled easily, but he could feel his body tensing in preparation, readying itself for anything Kaio might do. Good question. He said. And it's something I don't have an answer for. From there, Kaio apparently lost it, his nostrils flared, and his leg came up in an arc from under the stand, snapping it half on impact, though Naruto had no idea how he could be that flexible, considering he was a male. Do you not understand what I'm trying to say? Kaio snarled as newspapers fell around him. You don't have permission from us to hand out these newspapers. Therefore what you're doing is illegal. Naruto looked at the destroyed stand for a bit before giving Kaio an annoyed look. You're paying for that. He ignored the mutterings in the crowd of students about how he was going to get killed. And what does it matter anyway? All we did was post an article about the incident concerning Ishigami. Exactly. The splinter Kaio had caught in his hands lit up in flames and fell to the ground as small embers. And by doing so you've disturbed the peace in this academy. We are the ones who enforce the rules and keep the peace, which means that a shoddy upstart newspaper club like yourselves needs to get our permission. Naruto frowned as Kaio stepped on a newspaper and squished it into the ground under his foot. Keeping the peace. He hoped his voice sounded mocking. What peace? From what I've seen so far, there's no such thing as peace here, just a bunch of yokai running wild and doing whatever they wish. He scowled, his anger rising at seeing the things the club had worked on treated in such a disrespectful way. So, please, show me this peace that you're talking about, because apparently you're the only one who can see it. Kaio snarled and red-hot flames burst into life in his hands. The crowd of students all took a few steps back, talking excitedly amongst themselves. The public safety committee members took a couple steps back, too, letting Kaio have his space. Naruto sneered back at Kaio, but there was no doubting the excitement he felt. He could practically feel his adrenal gland getting ready to release adrenaline into his system. A kunai popped into his hand and he gripped it firmly. Before the situation could escalate any further, Naruto felt a hand rest on his shoulder and he looked to the side to see Jin with the same stoic expression he had before. That's enough, Naruto. He said before turning his attention on Kaio. Sorry for this, but we know now, so can we just forget this ever happened? We don't want any trouble, Kaio. He said the name with such distaste that it made Naruto think he wanted nothing more than to spill Kaio's guts on the floor. The fire was extinguished from Kaio's hands and he patted himself down as if he had ruined his suit by preparing for a fight. Fine. A cruel glint shone in his eyes. Just make sure you keep your underlings in check next time, you mangy dog. We wouldn't want a repeat of last year, now would we? Jin's grip on his shoulder tightened, but he didn't reply. Before the public safety committee had fully left the area, one of their members, a girl with purple hair and eyes, decided to make one last insult to them by standing on a nearby newspaper and tearing it in half with her feet. Naruto glared at her smirking face. The students began to leave, talking amongst themselves as they did so. He sighed and calmed himself down before turning around and facing his friends who all had their own expressions of anger and annoyance. He assumed they'd been sending their own dirty looks. Kaio and the members of his committee. Are you okay, Naruto-kun? Moka asked with concern in her voice. It looked like you were about to start a fight with him. I was going to. Naruto admitted, sending a glance at the werewolf who was still looking in the direction Kaio and his followers had left. Senpai, why did you stop me? I could have just beaten him and they would have left us alone. No, you couldn't have. Jin replied flatly. Look, I want you all to burn those papers. It's the only way they'll leave us alone. Out of the question. Naruto retorted heatedly. When Jin whirled on him with a glare, he stared back with equal intensity, or at least he hoped he did, he couldn't really tell. Don't tell me you're being serious about this and that you're actually willing to simply bow down to them like that. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Jin snapped back. The public safety committee isn't something you want to mess with, Naruto. A small show of sadness entered his eyes and a tad of hesitance, but it was dashed away a second later when Jin's entire expression hardened. You will burn the papers, end of story. Why? Naruto crossed his arms stubbornly. Why are you being like this? Who are they exactly? Jin pursed his lips and looked the group over, either he was trying to see if there was some way he could get out of it or he was making sure they were all listening. They're the academy's guardians and are more or less just over-aggressive student police. I've never seen them before, though. Tsukun said. If they're what you say, then why haven't they showed themselves before? I'm not surprised you've never seen them, they barely ever do anything. Jin sighed and ran a hand through his hair. They've become corrupt. These days they're basically just a yakuza gang, roaming around and taking payments from students for things like protection or like today, permission for handing out newspapers. They're merciless, too, anyone who gets on their bad side is punished severely. They sound like a bunch of dirtbags. Naruto grumbled and Jin nodded, apparently agreeing with him. They are. But it doesn't change the fact that if we don't listen to them, then, well, let's just say that we'll be on their bad side. Naruto frowned, the way Jin had phrased it made it sound like he'd been on their bad side, which sounded kinda lame, but he went with it anyway and he didn't like what he found being in that position. So that's it then, senpai. You're just giving in to them like that. Yes. Jin's voice was tight. I'm not going to argue about this, Naruto. Burn the papers. There's nothing to gain with involving ourselves with them, and I don't want any of you getting involved with old fights. He stared at them to make sure no one was going to argue. I don't want to hear another word about this, either. Naruto ground his teeth as Jin turned around and walked off. What a loser. Apparently Kurumu couldn't hold it in any longer. Jin-senpai isn't even thinking like a man. And why did he just leave like that? Naruto tapped his index finger on the table they were seated at outside the cafeteria, just for the sake of something to do. He'd never really liked sitting in one spot. In the middle of the table was an open box with a bunch of their newspapers. Calm down, Kurumu-chan. He said in an attempt to placate the succubus. I'm sure senpai has his reasons for being the way he is. She wheeled her head around and gave him a glare. How would you know that? They were alone in the area as classes were on, though no one in the group really cared that they were skipping at the moment. The other day he mentioned having a past with Kaio and consequently the Public Safety Committee, and from the way he acted today, coupled with his words about old fights, then I can safely assume it's not a very good past. Kaio also said something about not wanting a repeat of last year, too. Moka supplied and he nodded. It doesn't matter what senpai's past with them or his reasons are. Kurumu stood up and slammed her hands down on the table. If he's going to be a coward like this, then I'll just hand the newspapers myself. She grabbed the box in the middle, hefted it up and used her hips to help in carrying it while she grabbed Sukun's collar with her free hand. Come on, Sukun, we'll go hand these papers out. Wait, Kurumu-chan, you can't. Yes I can, Moka, just watch. She snapped back and began walking off while Sukun managed to get out of her grip and instead walked alongside her. Whether the human agreed with her or not was a mystery to Naruto, after all, he could have just went along with it so he didn't have to face the succubus's temper. Moka sighed and slouched in her chair as the two's forms disappeared around a corner. Why is Kurumu-chan getting so angry? Whether she was aware that she was giving Naruto a free view of her cleavage because of her position was unknown to him, but he didn't complain as he leaned his chin on his hands and used his peripherals to satisfy his hormones. I don't know, Moka-chan. He flinched when he felt Yukari kick his shin from under the table and looked over at her to see the young witch glaring at him as if she was telling him, look at her eyes, no lower. He rolled his eyes while Moka sat upright in her chair, the dejected expression that had been on her face becoming curious. Naruto-kun, where did you come from? He blinked. Well he coughed and straightened up. When two people have C. Not like that. She squeaked, her face doing a very good impression of her hair color. I mean, like she regained her composure and her face began to return to its usual pale complex. You once said that you came from a place that taught you how to use your yoki and I was just wondering where that was. Oh. He'd known what she was talking about, but he'd have preferred not to talk about it. But looking at her slightly tilted head, curious expression, her eyes lips which looked ready to pout, he felt himself asking why he wouldn't talk about it in the first place. Why was he avoiding the subject of Konoha so much? Probably because it hurt to even think about it bleh. The mentally strong part of his brain interrupted the depressing part. Just talk about it already. Get it off your chest. Man up, Naruto. Geez. You're Shinobi, not some pitiful and cheap rip-off that you'd find at a second-hand store. Naruto-kun. His attention snapped towards Moka and he dismissed the two parts of his brain. The mentally strong side snarled and sneered at him while the depressed part just looked away with a very Sasuke-like depressing aura about it as they both disappeared, hopefully to never see the light of day again. Yeah. What is it? We were spacing out, that's all. Yeah. Yukari decided now of all times was best for her to speak up with a cheeky grin on her face. It was like your mind was fighting itself. She snorted to herself, as if the idea of that happening to him was entirely possible, which was backed up by her next sentence. Only someone like you would be able to have a civil war with yourself. Oh, you have no idea, Yukari-chan. He mused, the mischievous side of his brain taking over and planning on what move to make next in their still ongoing war. He shook it off and forcefully pushed it away, and his entire brain kicked back into action, not allowing one side to overthrow the others any longer. So, you asked where I came from, right? Where I once lived. The vampire nodded. Yeah. Well, it was a village known as Konoha. Naruto said. He continued on when he saw her mouth open, and he could almost already hear the question rolling off her tongue. Don't worry if you don't know about it, I doubt anyone alive today would know about it. The village was destroyed a very, very long time ago. Oh. The atmosphere grew awkward. Moka looked apologetic, not for Konoha's destruction, but for bringing up the subject. He was just glad that she didn't say something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He'd hated it when people said that whenever someone close to him died, and he just knew he'd hate it if someone were to say it about Konoha. Those set of words just didn't help in any way whatsoever, they actually made it worse. Boy was he grateful when a bunch of negative emotions hit him, trepidation being the main one, and it was coming from the direction that Sukune and Kurumu had left in. Sorry to put an end to this nice little conversation, but it seems as though Sukune and Kurumu-chan managed to get themselves in trouble, and going by what has happened recently, I'd bet that it's the Public Safety Committee. That's unfair odds. Yukari retorted. He was spot on with his wager, it seemed. He could already hear the slot machines inside his head going crazy and screaming jackpot. Over and over again. An admittedly very ugly and oversized spider lady with purple hair was in the process of weaving webs around Sukune, who looked repulsed at the sight of her. Around 5 meters or so away from that scene, Kurumu was tied up against a tree, the same web-like substance keeping her in place, as she stared in shock and horror at what was happening to the human. No matter how much you struggle, you won't get anywhere. The yokai was apparently saying, her voice sounded like clicking sounds. Her 8 thin and totally not human legs were fast at work, weaving the web around Sukune at a pace that actually impressed Naruto. He tried knitting before. Jiraiya had suggested trying it out on their training trips all those months ago, saying that it would give him some patience. He imagined it was similar in a way. Moka and Yukari went over to Kurumu as soon as they'd laid their sights on her, while Naruto focused his attention on the arachnid lady who had just sealed Sukune's mouth shut. Hey. Spider woman. Over here, pay attention to me in a totally non-obnoxious way. She reared her ugly head around in his direction, showing off a set of jagged teeth that were probably sharp enough to pierce flesh. 2 teeth, at least he thought they were teeth, they were still coming out of her mouth and all around the size of his forearm reached down to her chin. Her purple eyes didn't have any pupils, and they seemed to have gained an insane, haughty and confident gleam to them. One of her legs kicked the tied-up Sukune, and he was sent rolling away with a grunt. Ah, so you've come to join the slaughter. She cackled, standing on her 2 human legs while the other 8 squirmed around. It looked like she was grinning, but he couldn't really tell, her giant teeth were in the way. Yeah, I'm here. He said. What should he do to her? Sever all of her spider legs? Sure, why not? They were creeping him out anyway. So. Dada kunai popped into his hand, the tool that was primed and ready to use his special arachnid-only slice move. Never really been one for beating on girls and all that stuff, but I don't think you really fall under that category anymore. Her legs lashed out, stabbing at the air around them and somehow managing to not hit any of the other limbs. She started to chew, her teeth raking against each other like nails against a blackboard. Her mouth opened in a small O, as if she was preparing to spit. And spit she did. Glorious. Was the first sarcastic thought that went through his head as the web arsed through the air, heading straight for him. He moved his head to the side, staring at the Public Safety Committee member, while clicking his tongue in annoyance, as her spitball of web sailed straight over his shoulder and splatted against the ground behind him. That is absolutely disgusting. He heard Kurumu complain, followed by agreeing words from Moka and Yukari. I can't help but agreeing with you, Kurumu-chan. He spoke over his shoulder. A bad excuse for Spider-Woman snarled, or at least the spider equivalent of a snarl. This is your only chance. She exclaimed. Seeing as you just arrived, I'll warn you, just like I did for those 2. If you choose to raise your hand against me and try to stop me from killing your friends, then it can only mean death for you. Oh, how humble of you to give someone like me a warning. He said sarcastically, but she seemed to take it the wrong way and actually looked pleased. But I'm afraid I'd rather deal with a death threat from an ugly spider than let my friends die. She dropped down onto the ground, her 8 legs that poked out of her stomach holding her up, presumably getting ready to attack or defend. Then prepare to die, newspaper club scum. He thought about congratulating her on the award-winning insult, but was forced to think about fighting when multiple web spitballs were rocketed at him from her mouth. He weaved in and out of them, not really wanting to get anywhere near them, let alone get hit by one. A sound similar to the one he had been making before when he'd been tapping the table reached his ears, just much more fast-paced and annoying. He brought his attention over to the Public Safety Committee member who was moving towards him with surprising speed for someone with 8 legs. The 2 human legs she still had were dragged along the way, like they were just extra baggage. "How nice of you." He smiled as she got closer and closer. His kunai hummed and began to glow in ethereal blue. "You know, I think I recognize you. You were the one who destroyed that newspaper earlier today, weren't you?" "Naruto-kun, be careful." Naruto took Moka's shout in stride, he was ready for the attack, and the kunai was humming away as if the weapon itself was excited. When his enemy was in range, she pounced her 8 spider legs spread wide, as if she was planning on giving him an 8-legged hug of death. Too easy. Maybe it would have been a better idea to get 2 kunai so that he had a weapon for each side, but it was too late now, he could already feel his arm moving like a whirlwind. There was barely any resistance every time he slashed through a leg, and his kunai sliced through each and every single limb. As soon as the last thin leg had been severed, he placed his hand on her stomach, between where her legs were protruding and her human legs, using the momentum she'd gained to send her into the air and behind him. It was then that the pain apparently registered in his foe's mind, because she let out an ear-piercing scream that made him wince and scrunch up his face. The oversized spider thumped to the ground, writhing around. It looked like it was trying to get back up, but the stumps which were now its legs didn't look very sturdy, and she kept falling flat on her face. "Can you go any higher in pitch?" Yukari asked, rubbing her temples as if she was trying to forcefully remove the memory of the sound. Eventually she stopped trying and collapsed. Either she just gave up, which was unlikely, or she passed out from the pain. Having 8 legs cut off couldn't have been a very nice feeling. Naruto turned around to face the others. Apparently they'd gone and gotten Tsukun, because he was lying down next to them, muffled grunts, and what he could only guess were complaints coming from his covered mouth. "Be quiet, Tsukun-kun," Moka scolded. Tsukun rolled his eyes and brought himself up into a sitting position with his legs, which turned out to be more difficult than it seemed, and Kurumu ended up helping him. He stared at Naruto pointedly, as if he was saying, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and cut me loose. And don't laugh." The blonde grinned slightly and walked over, the kunai in his hand humming with chakra again. My, Tsukun, I didn't know you were into Bonbeep. You said the Kido was defeated?" Kaio demanded, his eyes boring into his 2 subordinates who stood at attention and nodded at his question. "It seems that the newspaper club does indeed intend to fight us, then." His eyes went around to room in boredom, from the one light hanging from the roof, to the dark walls, to the equally dark ceiling, a perfect setting for an underground club. "Fine, if that is what they so foolishly wish, then I'll destroy them with my own hands." An amused-sounding chuckle reached his ears, and his eyes snapped in the direction it had come from. His 2 subordinates tensed in preparation but otherwise stayed still. My, it seems as though you're getting ahead of yourself." In the dimly lit room, all Kaio was able to make out was a white coat and a pair of slim jeans to go along with the feminine voice. By the woman's posture, he could only guess that she were leaning against the wall. "Even you wouldn't be able to destroy a club for no reason." "Who are you?" "Me? Oh, I'm just someone who wants to get even with someone from the same club that you want destroyed." He'd wager that there was a smirk on her face. "Anyway, back to more important matters. How do you intend to destroy the newspaper club?" He wasn't going to reply, but she continued on as if she hadn't expected him to anyway. "If only there was something, just one bit of information that would grant you the ability to destroy them." His eyes narrowed. "What do you know?" "About the newspaper club?" "Quite a bit, actually. And it just so happens that I have that one bit of information that would allow you to destroy them." "Tell me." "Everything." So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.